It started with something so small, so ordinary, that I almost brushed it off: a call to Emily's phone while she was in the shower, a local number with no caller ID, the kind you'd expect from a scammer or a wrong dial, except when I answered and said hello twice, there was nothing on the other end, just a few seconds of loaded silence before they hung up, and for some reason that silence felt like recognition. Like whoever was there knew exactly who I was and didn't want to speak. My gut tightened, the kind of quiet alarm you can't explain, and instead of ignoring it, I unlocked her phone, typed the number into her social media search, and up came a profile: soft pastel anime avatar, nickname, Little Peach, feed locked down tight, chat notifications muted, no notes, no profile details, just one unread message in their chat, "I miss you," 4 words that hit me like a punch to the ribs. My fingers felt weirdly light, my phone heavy in my other hand, and even though the chat was scrubbed clean, I clicked into his Moments feed, cover photo: a casual selfie, hair tousled, smirk in place, and yeah, he was good looking in that youthful, cocky way. I didn't dwell on it, just snapped a picture for myself, started scrolling his posts until one stopped me cold. "For a transfer, I only want $199. 1 cent more and I won't take it," and underneath, a screenshot of his chat with Emily where she was saved in his contacts as Princess Keeper. He'd asked for the promised $199, she'd sent him $20,000 instead, he'd refused and sent it back, said he only wanted $199, she replied with ellipses, then sent exactly that amount. And when he asked if she knew what it meant, she answered, "It means I want to be with you for a long, long time." Expressionless, I took another photo, then went digging into Emily's transaction history, line after line of transfers, the biggest and most consistent being $50,000 at the start of each month for 3 months straight, sprinkled between random amounts: $10,000, $20,000, $1,000, $520, $13, 14 special numbers if you knew how to read them, and I documented every single one, still keeping my face neutral as I marked their chat unread before putting the phone back. "What's wrong? Why are you spacing out?" Emily came out of the bathroom toweling her hair, looking at me curiously, her silk robe hanging loose at the collar, her makeup from earlier smudged at the corner. She'd always known how to turn heads, and yeah, people envied me for it, like having her on my arm was some kind of prize, and maybe I'd bought into that once, thinking as long as she wasn't out committing crimes, there was nothing I couldn't forgive, because I believed her love was mine alone, but now I knew that was just my illusion. "By the way, someone called you just now, didn't say anything and hung up, maybe check it, could be a scam," I said, keeping my tone casual, and she took the phone like it was nothing, tossed her towel into the laundry basket, picked up her purse. "I'm stepping out for a bit," she said, "don't wait up for me tonight," and when I asked if something was wrong at work, she spun some line about a friend's emergency, promised she might crash at her friend's place if it got too late, even threw in the name of someone I knew to make it sound solid. I nodded and told her to be careful, but when she was gone, I sat staring at the framed wedding photo on our wall, wondering why would she cheat, and who was this guy, the image of his face, the money transfers, the social posts all looping through my head until I realized I'd seen him before, about 6 months ago, the night Emily got hauled to the station after a fight at a bar. She had a scrape on her cheek, a chip on her shoulder. And the guy she'd tangled with was a bloody mess. As we were leaving, some young guy in a work uniform came rushing over, thanking her like she'd saved his life, but she brushed him off coldly. Back then, a buddy of mine leaned over and said, "Don't you think that kid looks a bit like you? 40%. I laughed it off, but now the memory slammed into the photo in my phone. It was him. That night, Emily didn't come home, and when she did the next evening, she brought takeout from my favorite place, said she'd waited in a long line for it. While she was in the shower, I slipped to the garage with the spare car key and checked her dash cam yesterday. She'd driven to the university on the south side, called him, told him to come down, and when he slid into the passenger seat, the audio filled with kissing and breathless teasing. They stopped at a residential complex, and the next clip was her driving out alone the next morning, then a call from her friend Zach. "Don't tell me you went to see your little peach again," he joked, and she brushed it off, but when he pressed reminding her how she used to be head over heels for Mesh, said something that froze me. "He's 33 now." I don't know, once he hit 30, I just started feeling like he was dirty. The word echoed in my head, and I remembered how our intimacy had started to fade right when I got busier at work, working overtime, coming home exhausted, pushing her off with, "Not now, I'm tired," until the third time she stormed out and I had to chase her to a bar. After that, something shifted. She stopped holding me in her sleep. And I told myself it was fine, she was still good to me, but now I saw it for what it was. That one word, dirty, made my skin crawl every time I thought of it, and as I sat there with a cigarette trembling in my hand, I knew this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about contempt, and that was something I could never take back. The thing about knowing someone's cheating on you is that the evidence doesn't just sit quietly, it burns in the back of your mind like a flashing neon sign you can't turn off, and the more you try to ignore it, the louder it gets. So instead of blowing up right away, I decided to play it calm, make her show her hand. Emily came back late the next night, all smiles like she'd just come from a spa, tossed me a takeout box from that trendy spot she knew I liked, and while she was showering, I grabbed my spare key and headed down to the garage, slid into her car, pulled up the dashcam feed, and let it play. There it was again, her at the university, him climbing in, their voices low and playful, punctuated with kisses, that smug laugh of his when he asked if she'd been with that old man, and her telling him to shut up, followed by the sound of the car accelerating like they couldn't get wherever they were going fast enough. They stopped at a gated complex and the camera cut out until morning, when only she reappeared in the driver's seat, and then came the part that made my jaw tighten. Her phone rang, Zach's voice coming through the speakers. "Where are you? Don't tell me you went to see your little peach again," and her evasive, "What do you think?" followed by him pushing, reminding her how she used to be crazy about me, and her dropping that line I couldn't forget, "He's 33 now. Once he hit 30, I just started feeling like he was dirty." I sat there in the driver's seat, fingers drumming on the wheel, replaying the last 6 months in my head, how our sex life had just stopped, how every time I reached for her, she'd push me away, too tired, too busy, and I'd told myself it was just a phase, that she was stressed, but now I could see the timeline clearly. Right when I was pulling all-nighters for work, she'd found someone else to give her attention to, someone younger, someone who, apparently, wasn't dirty. I remembered the first time she turned me down, she'd even apologized, said she felt bad. The second time she was colder. The third time she slammed the door and left, and I'd gone after her, thinking I'd done something wrong, thinking if I kissed her hard enough it would fix things, but it hadn't, and that night she'd slept with her back to me for the first time, no arm over my waist, no warmth. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter because she was still good to mesh, still cooked sometimes, still asked about my day, but all those scraps of affection were nothing compared to the contempt I heard in her voice on that recording. The word dirty just wouldn't leave my head, not because it hurt my ego, but because it showed exactly what she thought of me, like I was some used-up thing she'd outgrown. And maybe that's when the switch flipped, when I stopped thinking about whether we could fix this and started thinking about how I could make her feel even a fraction of the disgust she made me feel. So the next time I saw her, I didn't confront her, didn't give her the satisfaction of a fight, I just waited for the perfect moment. And that came sooner than I expected. Emily, fresh back from her little business trip, walking out of the arrivals gate with him by her side, suitcase in one hand, his hand in the other, both of them smiling like they were starring in some budget romance movie, her chirping about coming back here for her birthday, his face lit up like he'd just won the lottery. I stepped right into their path, called her name, loud enough for him to hear, and watched the color drain from her face. Saw her drop his hand like it was on fire. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, and he looked like he wanted to disappear. She hesitated, then started to move toward me, but I cut her off with a smile and said, "Come on, I'll give you both a ride. It's hard to get a cab here," and even though every cell in his body told him to run, he followed. I made sure Emily sat in the back with me and stuck him up front, kept my voice casual as I asked about his major, his school, dropping names of professors I knew would rattle him, and it worked. His answers got shorter, his voice shaky. When we dropped him off, he couldn't get out fast enough, and I didn't miss the way she glared at me in the rearview mirror. I pulled over a few blocks later, turned to her, and said flatly, "Let's talk about the divorce," and the look she gave me wasn't shock, wasn't guilt, it was irritation, like I'd just inconvenienced her. She didn't argue, didn't deny anything, just said, "Fine," and that "fine" hit harder than any excuse she could have made. In that moment, I knew there was nothing to save, nothing I even wanted to save, but that didn't mean I was going to let her walk away without feeling the weight of what she'd done, and part of me was already thinking about how to make sure the next move was mine, not hers. When I finally said the word divorce out loud to her, it was like dropping a rock into a bottomless well, no echo, no ripple, just swallowed up in silence until she gave me that flat, fine, and looked away, and I realized there wasn't going to be some dramatic fight, no tears, no begging, no denial. She'd already made her peace with it, or maybe she'd never cared enough to try, and that in itself was worse than if she'd screamed at me, because it meant I'd been erased from her life long before. I even caught on. Still, I wasn't about to walk into the courthouse the next day with nothing but my wounded pride, so I called Kelsey, a friend I trusted to handle the paperwork and keep her mouth shut, and told her everything, well, almost everything. I gave her the photos, the dashcam audio, the transaction history, and a list of our shared assets. Told her I wanted the split to be fair on paper but in reality tilted in my favor, because Emily wasn't just walking away from me, she was walking away after making me feel like I'd somehow decayed into something unworthy. Kelsey didn't waste time, said she'd have the agreement ready by the time I got back from my upcoming business trip, then paused and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, because that's what you say when you're not fine but don't want to talk about it, and she didn't push. 2 days later, while I was packing for the trip, Emily showed up earlier than expected, wearing that "I have something to say" expression, but instead of remorse or reason, she came at me accusingly, claiming I'd had something to do with her boy-toys scholarship being cancelled. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process the fact that she was more worried about him than about the marriage she'd just blown up, then told her flatly I didn't know a damn thing about his scholarship, but if I wanted to ruin him, I'd have done a lot more than that. I had the kind of proof that could get him expelled, and she knew it, before she could come up with a retort. The front door opened and in walked my older brother, Henry, looking at me with that tight-lipped, controlled expression he used when he was furious but trying not to show it. "Who's this guy she's talking about?" he asked, eyes flicking between us, and Emily immediately told him to stay out of it, but Henry wasn't having it, stepping closer to me like he was ready to throw down if I didn't answer. I told him again it was none of his business, that this was between me and Emily, but the tension snapped when he called me a coward and swung his fist connected with my jaw, and before I could even think about whether he deserved it or not, I was hitting him back, the two of us going at it like we were kids again, except this time there was nothing playful about it. Emily didn't even try to break it up, she just stepped aside, watching us trade blows until I stormed out, spitting blood and cursing under my breath. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment with the divorce papers Kelsey had drawn up, staring at my name in black ink, and I felt this weird mix of anger and exhaustion, like I was too drained to fight but too proud to fold. I lit a cigarette, even though I'd quit years ago because Emily hated the smell, and as the smoke curled up toward the ceiling, I realized this was the first moment in a long time that I didn't care what she thought of me. The next morning, I texted her a time and place to meet at the Civil Affairs office, and when she tried to stall, claiming she wasn't sure when she'd be free, I told her she had 48 hours. If she didn't show up, I'd make sure every friend, family member, and coworker she had knew exactly who she'd been sleeping with and how much she'd been paying him. She hung up on me, and I half expected her to dig her heels in, but instead, the very next night, she turned up at my door like nothing had happened, tossing out some sarcastic line about not being welcome in her own home anymore. I didn't even bother to answer, just asked what she wanted, and she said she had a question whether I'd been the one to tank her boy-toys scholarship, and when I denied it, she scoffed like she didn't believe me. Henry's voice came from the hallway before I could say anything else, and the whole scene replayed: him demanding answers, me telling him to stay out of it, him swinging first, except this time I didn't swing back, I just walked away, because I knew tomorrow I'd see her across from me at that office, pen in hand, and I didn't want anything to get in the way of watching her sign her name to the end of us. The morning we met at the Civil Affairs office, I got there early, number ticket in hand, sitting on one of those hard plastic chairs under the flickering fluorescent lights, wondering how 10 years could feel both like a lifetime and like something I could crumple up and toss in the trash without a second thought. And then Emily walked in, sunglasses on, expression calm like we were meeting to sign for a package, not to end a marriage. She sat beside me without a word, and for a few minutes we just waited in silence, the kind where every tick of the clock feels louder than normal, until our number was called and I stood, ready to get it over with, but she grabbed my wrist. Her voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't pleading, it was almost unsteady when she said, "That day, I lied to you. I didn't go to see him. I've already cut things off with him. He called me about the scholarship, and I knew it wasn't you. I was just glad it gave me an excuse to come see you. I never thought about divorce. I never wanted to divorce you." I stared at her, not because I believed her, but because I couldn't figure out why she thought this was the time to play that card. Maybe in the past, those words would have hit me hard, maybe I would have softened, maybe I would have wanted to protect her from herself, but now all I could feel was this cold, clean detachment, like I was watching someone else's life play out. She tightened her grip, and for a second I saw the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes, but I pulled free, tore the paper in my hand into shreds, and went back to the counter for a fresh copy. "From the moment this started until now, we haven't actually talked about it," I said quietly. "You've never asked how I found out you were cheating, what I know, or why I decided to leave. So let's go over it, shall we? About 6 months ago, you started pulling away. Our sex life faded, your mood shifted, and then one night while drinking, you met him. Maybe it was because he looked a little like me. Maybe because he was younger, livelier. But you didn't hold back. You cheated. And cheating is wrong no matter what. But instead of owning it, you decided to put it on me. You said that after I turned 30, you felt I was dirty. Because of the lines on my face. Because my body wasn't the same. You called me a withered flower you could smell rotting from a distance. Emily, when you used those words, do you have any idea how disgusting you looked in my eyes? I started wondering how blind I'd been to choose someone like you. Even with the mess stuck to my shoes, you were still the one complaining about the smell." Her face tightened, but she didn't say a word, and I didn't need her to. The process went quickly: sign here, stamp there, reminder to come back in a month for the certificate, and just like that, it was done. She left without looking back, and I didn't stop her. Later, Henry came over to pack up what she'd left behind, moving quietly through the place like he didn't want to disturb anything. Then cooking a simple dinner and cracking open a bottle of wine. We sat at the table, him drinking fast, me slower, the air heavy with things neither of us wanted to say until he finally spoke. "Back then, I didn't know Ryan had those kinds of thoughts about you. If I had," I shook my head and cut him off, "so what if you had? It wouldn't change anything now. Regret doesn't mean a thing." He frowned, but I just went on. "When I was in my 20s, I was braver. I could imagine a future with someone 5 years younger than me, and I didn't care what anyone thought. Now I don't even know if I want to start over. Love, when it comes, is loud and blazing. When it leaves, it rots quietly. What other people give you isn't permanent. But that's okay. People die from sickness, from poverty, but I've never heard of anyone dying from a lack of love. Maybe I was a little drunk, maybe I just needed to hear my own thoughts out loud," but Henry didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression unreadable, until the next morning when I woke up to a note saying he'd had to catch a flight, that he'd met someone good and planned to be with her, and that I should take care of myself. For a while, work became the only thing keeping me from sinking too deep. Back-to-back meetings, deadlines, contracts to revise, until one afternoon my phone lit up with Zach's name. His voice was strained. "I know I shouldn't be calling, but in the last 2 weeks, Emily's been hospitalized twice for alcohol poisoning. I can't stop her. You're the only one who might talk some sense into her." I didn't know if he expected me to say yes, but the next day I walked into her hospital room, and she looked smaller somehow, paler, but when our eyes met, she glanced away like I was a stranger. Before I could say anything, she blurted, "My arm hurts. My left arm. Every time it rains, it aches bad. Remember that year we didn't see each other for 6 months? I told you my dad grounded me. But actually I was in the hospital. He broke my arm. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry." I raised an eyebrow, more out of disbelief than sympathy, and asked, "Why tell me now?" She looked at me cautiously, and for the first time, I realized she still thought she could pull me back in with pity. Honestly, now's the worst time to bring it up, I said. If you'd told me back then, maybe I'd have felt sorry for you, thought you sacrificed for me. But now? That was your choice. Your decision to suffer for the person you loved. Whether it turned out good or bad, you own it. Just like I own the fact that when the person I chose cheated, I had to bear it. The flicker in her eyes dimmed, and she turned her face away. If you won't even give me a chance, why did you come? She asked. I leaned against the bed rail, my voice calm, to tell you not to drink yourself to death, and to remind you not to delay our next appointment at the registry in 2 weeks. Emily, I want a divorce, not to be a widower. Her voice dropped into a growl. You hate me that much? I didn't answer. I just walked out, her voice chasing after me. You must want to kill me. I didn't turn around. Outside, Zach was pacing, looking frustrated. I went through the trouble of calling you here, and you can't even talk to her properly. I shot him a look. Stay out of it, Zach. Even if I die, don't ever call her for me again. He shook his head, muttering about how none of this made sense, how I was clearly still mad but wouldn't say what I was really mad about. Truth was, I didn't fully know myself, only that when it came to her, I couldn't find the part of me that used to bend, couldn't force the words she wanted to hear, because whatever had been between us was gone, and all that was left was the countdown to the day I could walk away for good. By the time the day of our final appointment came, there was no anger left in me, just this strange kind of clarity, like I'd already lived through every possible outcome in my head, and now it was just about walking the last few steps to the finish line. And when Emily showed up at the Civil Affairs office, she didn't look like someone being dragged there against her will. She looked almost serene, maybe even a little relieved. We didn't talk much while waiting for our number to be called, but I could feel her glancing at me every so often, like she was searching for something in my face, maybe regret, maybe hesitation, and finding neither. When our turn came, we went through the motions: sign here, stamp here, confirm your identity, and it was done, except as I turned to leave, she suddenly called out my name, her voice sharper than it had been in months, and when I looked back, her hands were in her pockets, shoulders tense, and she said, apologize to me, like it was a demand, like I was supposed to give her closure for something she destroyed. My hands twitched, because for a second I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because it was insane, and instead of answering, I started walking again, but she stepped forward, her voice rising, I'm sorry, the words almost stumbling out, and I stopped, not because it mattered, but because I wanted to see her say it. I gave a small nod, turned, and walked away, my steps feeling lighter than they had in years, not because I'd forgiven her, but because I no longer carried any part of her with me. In the weeks that followed, I heard things through Zach: how Emily's boy toy had tried to stick around, how she tried to keep him in her life now that I was gone, but it didn't last. The money was gone, the novelty wore off, and in the end, he was just a living reminder of the worst choice she'd ever made. She tried to lean on him, but he wasn't built for it. And when I finally decided to cut off every last string by reclaiming the money I could prove I'd given her to give him, he folded fast, covering the gap himself just to keep me from going after her directly. She didn't take that well, slapped him, called him a hypocrite, stormed out, and that was the last I heard about either of them together. Meanwhile, I'd thrown myself into work harder than ever, because nothing numbs you like exhaustion, and I kept my head down until the day came to pick up the divorce certificate. She was already there when I arrived, standing off to the side, scrolling her phone like it was just another errand, and when they called our names, we went up, signed for our copies, and walked out into the cold morning air without a word. There was no handshake, no take care, no lingering look, just two people who had once meant everything to each other now walking in opposite directions. As I headed for my car, Zach texted me asking if I felt like I'd won, and I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. This wasn't about winning, it was about ending it clean, because that was the truth. There's no winning in this kind of mess, only degrees of losing, and the best you can do is walk away with your head high and your hands empty. Still, as I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught myself glancing in the rearview mirror, not at her but at the building disappearing behind me, thinking about how from 18 to 28, from the first time we met to the last time we stood in the same room, it had been a decade of my life, 10 years where I'd gone from an outsider to the center of her world and then back to nothing, and yet I didn't feel hollow, I didn't feel broken, I just felt done. Maybe that's the real closure people talk about, not some grand speech or teary hug, but the moment you realize you don't need anything from them anymore, not even an apology. I drove home with the window down, the wind in my face, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel the urge to look back. Because whatever part of me she tried to rot with her words, whatever piece she thought she could crush with her choices, it wasn't hers anymore, and it never would be again. In the days after I walked out of that office with the divorce certificate in my hand, life didn't feel dramatically different at first. It wasn't like the sky cleared and birds started singing, but there was this quiet, steady shift, like a weight had been unstrapped from my shoulders without me even realizing how heavy it had been. I filled my days with work, long hours and late nights, not because I had to but because the focus kept my mind from drifting anywhere near her, and for a while that was enough. Until Zach called me one evening sounding like he was caught between guilt and desperation, telling me Emily had been drinking herself into the hospital again and I was the only one who might get through to her. I didn't want to go, didn't want to see her in that bed looking at me with whatever story she was ready to spin, but some stubborn part of me showed up anyway. Maybe just to prove to myself that seeing her now wouldn't change a damn thing. She looked smaller, paler, hair messy against the pillow, but her eyes still had that calculating flicker when they met mine, and instead of saying hello, she went straight into some half-confession about the time she disappeared for 6 months years ago, claiming her father had broken her arm, that she'd been in the hospital hiding it from me so I wouldn't worry. Maybe once, that would have cracked me open, but now all it did was make me wonder why she thought pity would work on me after everything. I told her the truth that if she'd told me back then, I might have felt sorry for her, might have believed she'd done it all for me, but now it was just her choice, her consequence, just like it had been my choice to marry her and my consequence to deal with her cheating. She turned away, voice low, asking why I even came if I wasn't going to give her another chance. And I told her flat out I was there to tell her not to drink herself to death before our last registry appointment, because I wanted a divorce, not a funeral. She asked if I hated her that much, and I didn't answer, just walked out to find Zach pacing outside. He tried to scold me for not talking to her properly, like I was supposed to hold her hand and tell her everything was going to be fine, but I told him not to call me for her again, no matter what. The truth was, even I didn't fully understand the knot of emotions she still twisted up inside me: anger, disgust, exhaustion, and this strange sense of finality, but I knew none of it pointed toward wanting her back. A week later, the final appointment came, and she showed up on time, signed the last of the paperwork, and just like that it was over for good. She didn't cry, I didn't either, and we walked out of the building in opposite directions without a backward glance. Later I heard through Zach that she tried to keep the guy she'd cheated with in her life, maybe thinking he could replace me now that the dust had settled, but it fizzled fast without the thrill of sneaking around and without the money I'd been indirectly feeding into their little fantasy. There was nothing holding it together. Eventually he became just another name in her phone, another face she probably wished she could forget, and from what I heard, he cut her off completely after I made it clear I could still go after the money trail. I didn't care enough to follow up, because by then I was done tracking her moves, done keeping mental tabs on her downfall. She could crash or she could rebuild, but it was no longer my concern. What mattered was that for the first time in 10 years, my life was mine again, and I wasn't wasting it on someone who once looked me in the eye and decided I was dirty just for getting older. I kept moving forward, kept my head down, and if there were nights where I caught myself thinking about how we met, about that stubborn kid at the train station who swore he'd be good if I let him stay, I didn't linger on it, because the truth was, that version of her died long before our marriage did, and the woman I divorced was a stranger. Maybe someday I'll meet someone new, maybe I won't. But either way I'm not afraid of being alone. Love when it's good can light up your whole life, but when it's gone, it's just gone, and I'd rather stand in the dark by myself than ever go back to someone who taught me how cold it feels when the light's been fake all along.